I love grand strategy games, and the prospect of playing any Civilization game always fills me with excitement. Civilization 6 was acclaimed upon its release as being a glaring improvement over its predecessor. Now that the dust had settled and the game has been around for some time, I do not think that they have told us the whole story. I've really enjoyed playing this turn-based strategy game. Yet, I admit, I've become a fan of the game's scenarios or expansions, and I was not totally convinced by the traditional sandbox mode that was always been my favorite previously. This entry of the series presents a considerable dose of new mechanics, but that, after squeezed, it is clear that they are only derivations of what already happened in the last expansion of the previous game. Two of those are mandatory to be mentioned, given the fact that they change the planning of the cities in a remarkable way. The introduction of specialized districts that add bonuses and allow for evolutions throughout the game has now ended up with the random upgrades of each of the hexagons that we could make in previous games. The decision of where to put them messes with many things in the present and future. Each one obeys certain rules, giving more or less bonuses depending on their location. This seems simple when seen individually. We just have to choose the hexagon that assigns the biggest bonus and put the district there. Well, nothing special. However, this placement will interfere with the placement of new districts in the future, or with the improvement of the hexagons if some new bonus is discovered in that tile, or even with the placement of old wonders. This has turned my usual farm-filled cities into sparsely upgraded cities, since any improvement I could make could stir up future bonuses. Speaking of improvements, now the workers are consumables. In the old days we would just leave them there to make automatic improvements, and there you go. We never thought about them anymore. But they were continually there in their toil to micromanage hexagons. Now they only make 3 improvements each, and then we have to produce or buy a new unit. It is no longer workers that build roads also, but the merchants who, when starting a commercial route, create the road to the city which they are going. Briefly, these are the biggest changes that the game presents us. There are other changes, but with less impact on gameplay. In my opinion, all these changes make the game more interesting. The 4 forms of victory are now domination, religious, and science that already existed, and the diplomatic changed to the cultural one. Now everything that does not involve war has become much more interesting. We can spread religion all over the world, with our missionaries and apostles being able to engage in religious battles with their opponents, something that involves lightnings and arms thrown in the air until one of them gets tired and ends up dying of apparent religious boredom. The spies work in a funny way, and they give a good help to our development by stealing technology that saves us a good amount of shifts in our productions. Something very important in a scientific victory. Planning our cities to offer maximum tourism is an exasperating challenge, because it is a bit of a trial and error, since we do not know the practical results of our decisions. But in a game of strategy, it is blood that we seek, and it is with war that we obtain it. Artificial intelligence has many flaws, and it is in this aspect that is more noticeable. If we choose a low level of difficulty, the enemy does nothing. But if we choose a high level, it cheats, and produces much more units than possible, overwhelming us by the magnitude of his numbers. Even though they are not able to have a decent strategy during a war, and whether it is against us or against another bot player, wars are never beautiful to see and always end up close to a draw. I have been declared war multiple times, so many that I do not always understand why. The speed with which they declare war does not mean that they end up by attacking us. Often they do not, and sometimes they cannot even reasonably interpret the terms of the peace treaties, mostly to their disadvantage. If they consider that they are losing a war, even if they are winning it, they have no problem offering us cities to end up the war. Probably they do not mind that because one of the game's biggest issues is spam of cities. There is no downside to have multiple ones, because now the degree of satisfaction of the inhabitants is done one by one and not in a general way. It is also very easy to solve their needs, which means that if we distract ourselves, we are surrounded by a sea of adversary cities and with no space to expand. In the long run, more cities represent more points to everything. Governing is now easier. Civics has more branches and we unlock new forms of government that now give us access to more spaces to place cards. Each of these cards gives us access to bonuses that add up to specific bonuses that each form of government gives us. Most of these cards we ended up by never using, but I think it was the way that Firaxis managed to create conditions for the player to adapt to sudden changes in game conditions. For example, if you are investing in a cultural victory but suddenly we are attacked by two empires, we can simply change the cards to completely change the unit bonuses and production, making it much easier to build troops or maintain it. It is also easier to create relationships with artificial intelligence. We just do not have to oppose any of its agendas, and although this field seems to me much better, it continues to sway with the business proposals that it only accepts if they are ultra advantageous to it. In later stages of the game, where new units such as naturalists or archaeologists are already in the field, even the simple exchange of relics or great works becomes virtually impossible without great harm to us. As always, the final part of the game becomes a bit boring. The other empires move all their units every round, even without any purpose, making each turn a great moment of waiting. Choose a quick moves game in the initial setup if you do not have the patience for this. Interestingly, there is still some community to play multiplayer online, but they are hardcore players. I was simply stumped. You either know what you are doing or you'll be dead meat. Graphically, the game has took a step back, but I like the way they present the product to us, and I think it works well with the changes they have made to the game. The music continues to be epic, but this time I think it's something of repetitive. Maybe I say this because I've played so many hours, but I was less impressed with the songs in this entry than with the previous one. In conclusion, I have to say that I had a lot of fun with the game, but there are too many little annoying things with it. The multiple childish animations of the opponents that we constantly have to watch, the weak artificial intelligence, the predominance of city spam, the delay of the opponents to make decisions, the inconsistency of wars. Well, all this is sand in the gears. With me, these games will never fail. I would simply continue to play it another 100 or 200 hours, always with new ideas. There is so much new stuff in this game that makes it more interesting, so many new options that have always kept me away from the war, that it's almost a pity I leave the game and move on to the next one. I always end up noticing these problems because I already play the game with the purpose of analyzing it. Will the casual player notice this? Well, I do not know, but I've noticed it, and I cannot give a higher rating for that reason. Just one more turn and then I'll go to sleep.